in my head, the struggle, everything's got to be perfect. And if there's even a dent in this, I'm going to be embarrassed and made to look foolish.
For decades, David Letterman sat across from Hollywood's brightest, grinning, needling, exposing cracks in their polished images. His wit was sharp, his charm disarming. But some truths were too dangerous, too vile to reveal. The golden age of Hollywood shined with glamour, but behind the curtain lurked shadows no audience was ever meant to see. Now, Letterman breaks the silence. After years of whispers, he names 7 Golden Age stars whose public charm was nothing but a mask. Their legacies sparkle in history books, but their private lives tell stories of cruelty, manipulation, and darkness that no spotlight could ever wash away. But who were these stars, and what secrets make their legacies impossible to admire the same way again? David Letterman built a career out of dissecting the comedy world.
For the 67th Annual Academy Awards, David Letterman!
He admired its greats, studied their timing, and sharpened his own craft by watching those who came before him. The spotlight fascinated him, but it also revealed an industry driven by ego, ambition, and secrecy. Comedy, he learned early on, was not just about punchlines and applause. It was a battlefield where reputation, influence, and fear determined who would rise and who would fall. And when the cameras were off and the makeup wiped away, Letterman saw another side of show business, one that stayed with him long after the laughter faded. One comedian in particular embodied that darkness, a figure whose charm on stage belied a cruelty so sharp it haunted those in his orbit for decades. On stage, this man was untouchable. He sold out theaters across the country, broke attendance records, and left audiences doubled over in laughter. He was magnetic, the kind of performer whose energy could fill a room even without a microphone. He sold himself as the everyman, the lovable rogue, the kind of guy you'd grab a beer with after the show. Interviews revealed a quick wit and self-deprecating humor that endeared him to fans. Improvisation came naturally to him. He could read a crowd in seconds, bending the room to his comedic will. Letterman, still a young comic eager to climb the ranks, idolized him. He was one of the guys we all wanted to be, Letterman recalled years later. Sharp, funny, fearless, you thought you could trust him. And in some ways, you did, until you weren't laughing anymore. Backstage, however, the charm evaporated. The same wit that drew applause became a weapon. Younger comics, eager to prove themselves, were often reduced to tears by barbed remarks disguised as jokes. Writers who dared to call out stolen material were publicly humiliated, some reconsidering careers they had spent years building. Letterman watched silently, understanding that the wrong move or a misplaced word could make him the next target. The paradox was cruel. The man who could make thousands laugh also had the power to break individuals completely. And the industry, profitable and protective, looked the other way, shielding the monster from accountability. Crew members whispered about violent tantrums, shouting fits so intense that entire production teams would walk off, refusing to return until the chaos subsided. Tales of women coerced or manipulated by his fame circulated quietly, too dark for newspapers, but too numerous to ignore. The comedian's public persona shielded him. His fans only saw the laughter, not the tears. Letterman realized that in entertainment, morality was often secondary to profitability. Fame became a shield, laughter a distraction, and the truth buried beneath box office numbers and glowing reviews. Yet this was not cruelty for cruelty's sake. It was a calculated form of control. By keeping everyone around him anxious, uncertain, and fearful, he solidified his dominance in the comedy world. Letterman, navigating this landscape as an aspiring comic, understood that survival often meant silence, discretion, and careful observation. People laughed because they didn't know, he later reflected. But I knew, and I couldn't laugh anymore. Over time, Letterman began to recognize the mechanics behind the performance, the charm, the improvisation, the ability to disarm a room. These were tools, not just for entertainment, but for maintaining authority. The comedian's talent was undeniable, yet it was inseparable from manipulation. Letterman's admiration slowly evolved into caution, his lessons into wisdom. He learned that charisma could mask cruelty, that applause could hide pain, and that the very qualities that make someone revered could also make them dangerous. This experience left a lasting impression on Letterman. It shaped his understanding of comedy, fame, and human behavior. The so-called hero of comedy was not merely flawed, he was a monster, a reminder that in show business, darkness often wears a smile. For Letterman, the lesson was clear. Talent and charm alone do not equate to goodness, and the world behind the curtain often tells a very different story than the one presented under the lights. And for every laugh that reached the audience, there was a shadow lingering backstage, invisible to most, but unforgettable to those who witnessed it firsthand. She was America's darling, the girl next door of Hollywood's golden age. Her smile lit cinema screens, her voice charmed millions, and her image radiated innocence. Children adored her, adults envied her, and for decades, the public assumed she was the very definition of sweetness. She was the kind of star who seemed untouchable, whose every gesture was scrutinized and admired, whose popularity transcended generations. But David Letterman, who grew up watching her films and later heard industry whispers firsthand, discovered a far different reality. Behind that smile was a woman who wielded cruelty with the precision of a ruler wielding a scepter, commanding obedience and fear alike. On set, she demanded absolute control. Directors would rearrange shooting schedules to accommodate her whims. Producers bent budgets, altered deadlines, and reshuffled crews to maintain her comfort. Co-stars quickly learned that crossing her, even unintentionally, could mean career suicide. Letterman recounted stories of her sabotaging fellow actresses, quietly whispering damaging rumors that could permanently blacklist them from projects. The charm she displayed in public interviews, talk shows, and magazine spreads served as a mask. Privately, she was ruthless, a strategist who knew the power of subtle intimidation. One story, in particular, haunted Letterman. A young actress, new to Hollywood and full of promise, had outshone her in a test screening for a major studio film. Furious, the star used her influence to have nearly all of the newcomer's scenes cut, reducing her to a mere footnote in the production. The aspiring actress's career never recovered. To Letterman, this was emblematic of the star's modus operandi. Public smiles were armor, private cruelty a weapon. Crew members corroborated similar accounts, explaining how entire days of filming could be ruined by a single shift in her mood. Minor mistakes, forgotten lines, misplaced props, slight timing errors, were often met with scathing verbal assaults that left even seasoned professionals trembling, their confidence shattered. Letterman, who had idolized her as a boy, was disillusioned as an adult. The sweetness he had once admired was a carefully curated performance, a product of branding rather than personality. She cultivated loyalty through fear, using charm and wit to deflect suspicion while quietly asserting dominance over everyone around her. Her manipulations extended to men and women alike, ensuring that anyone who might challenge her position, reputation, or authority was systematically undermined. Even respected directors and producers navigated her moods cautiously, aware that angering her could disrupt productions and damage careers. Yet she maintained a public persona of mentorship, of generosity, of nurturing talent. Press releases featured her dispensing advice to aspiring actresses. Interviews praised her guidance and encouragement. Hollywood awarded her accolades that cemented her image as America's sweetheart. Letterman, recognizing the gap between image and reality, reflected, "She played America's sweetheart, but she didn't treat America, or anyone else, like sweethearts. She treated them like servants." Her public kindness became a strategic performance, a means to deflect scrutiny while maintaining absolute control behind the scenes. The lessons for Letterman were harsh, but clear. Hollywood's brightest faces could conceal its darkest realities. Fame and image often overrode morality, The people you admired on screen could be tyrants off it. She was proof that adoration and terror were not mutually exclusive, that power could corrupt even the most polished veneer, and that appearances could be dangerously deceiving. Letterman came to understand that the industry often protected those whose marketability mattered more than their character, prioritizing profit over integrity. In his mind, the actress represented Hollywood's greatest hypocrisy, an angel on camera, a tyrant in reality. She taught him that charm and talent, no matter how dazzling, could be weaponized, that the smiles people adored could mask intimidation, and that in an industry built on image, the truth often remained invisible to the audience. For Letterman, this awareness became part of his understanding of fame and power, an enduring lesson in the human cost behind the glamour, the hidden cruelty that could thrive just out of the public's gaze. Long before David Letterman became the face of late-night television, another man reigned supreme. He was the king of the desk, the master of monologues, the host who seemed untouchable. Audiences adored him.
King of late-night television, Johnny Carson. This is his former home in Malibu. He lived there for 30 years until he passed away in 2005.
Advertisers showered him with money, and for decades, he was the standard against which every host was measured. To the public, he appeared genial, generous, endlessly supportive of younger talent, a mentor, even a friend. But Letterman discovered that behind that polished veneer was something far darker. A man who built an empire not just on talent, but on sabotage. As a young boy growing up in Indiana, Letterman idolized him. He studied his timing, his wit, the way he could control an audience with ease. He dreamed of one day sitting behind a similar desk, imagining that the path to late-night glory was paved with talent, perseverance, and charm. But when Letterman entered the television industry, he began to hear the stories. Writers were blacklisted for minor infractions, comedians suddenly lost bookings after appearing on competing shows, and networks were quietly pressured to cancel pilots that might compete with his throne. One fellow comic confided in Letterman that the host had personally called club owners, warning them not to book him. "He wants to be the only one," the comic said bitterly. "He doesn't want competition. He wants worship." Letterman realized that this wasn't occasional envy, it was strategy. This host's generosity was performative, and his mentorship came with a caveat. You were safe only as long as you posed no threat. Letterman himself was not spared. Early in his career, when whispers suggested he might eventually inherit a late-night crown, the host reportedly lobbied against him, labeling him too edgy, too weird for mainstream America. Opportunities were delayed or denied, not because Letterman lacked talent, but because someone powerful had deliberately limited his path. He began to see the machinery behind the scenes, an intricate web of favors withdrawn, whispered warnings, and silent blacklists. What made it insidious was the contrast between image and reality. On television, the host was the perfect friend to young comedians, the genial mentor who encouraged creativity. Off-camera, he orchestrated rivalries, blocked careers, and ensured that no one would rise close to his level. Letterman, reflecting years later, called it a kind of hidden evil, one that could exist undetected precisely because it was invisible to the audience. People thought he was everyone's friend, Letterman said, but he was only a friend to himself. To me, that's evil, not the kind you see, but the kind that's hidden in plain sight. Letterman came to understand that success in entertainment was rarely just about talent. It was about knowing how to play the system, how to protect your throne, and sometimes how to quietly crush anyone ambitious enough to challenge you. The lessons of that host, painful as they were, became part of Letterman's own approach to navigating the cutthroat world of television, a world where public smiles could conceal ruthless ambition, and where the price of applause was often unseen cruelty. He was Hollywood glamour personified, square-jawed, impeccably dressed, with a smile that could melt the hearts of audiences coast to coast. Women adored him, men admired him. Studio executives praised him as the embodiment of the Golden Age dream. On the silver screen, he was every romantic ideal, every heroic figure, every charming leading man. He could carry a film with nothing more than a glance, a smile, or a simple gesture, and audiences responded with devotion bordering on worship. But David Letterman, as he navigated the corridors of show business, came to see a darker side, a man whose charm masked cruelty and whose carefully cultivated smile served as camouflage for intimidation. Stories circulated in the industry, whispered but rarely printed. His temper could ignite in an instant, and crew members bore the brunt of it. Public humiliations, screaming tirades, and occasional physical intimidation were not anomalies. They were routine. Letterman heard accounts of young actors being shoved against walls after minor mistakes, their errors dismissed later as tough love, a phrase that thinly veiled the fear it created. Extras spoke of entire days spent walking on eggshells, fearful that a misplaced step or a slight miscue would trigger an eruption. Even seasoned professionals learned that perfection was never enough. The leading man demanded constant vigilance, and mistakes were punished swiftly and harshly. The darker side of his behavior extended beyond the set. Women who worked with him confided that he used his star power as leverage, pressuring actresses into situations they did not consent to, often threatening their careers if they refused. Studios, worried about box office revenue and the allure of the star's public image, frequently shielded him, protecting his reputation at the expense of those harmed. Journalists avoided scrutiny, editors feared losing access to exclusive stories, and co-workers quickly learned that silence was safer than speaking out. Letterman realized that his charm, the very thing that endeared him to fans, was a weapon in itself, a tool to maintain power and control without anyone outside the industry suspecting a thing. Letterman, who had once watched the man's films in awe as a child, could no longer reconcile his admiration with the stories he heard as an adult. The charm that had inspired him became a tool for manipulation, control, and domination. His good guy image was armor, carefully curated over decades. The fear he instilled was invisible to audiences, but the people who worked with him felt it every day.
However, depressed, angry, hurt, shocked, all that other thing that when you saw that announcement on the evening news in Los Angeles, sitting in the man's house.
Co-stars described being pitted against each other, jealousy and rivalry deliberately stoked to ensure compliance and dependence. Crew members recounted erratic behavior, schedules altered mid-shoot without explanation, and entire days of production wasted because of a single mood swing. The more Letterman learned, the clearer it became. Hollywood's machinery was designed to protect image over people and talent over decency. Success, he realized, was not always earned. It was often maintained through intimidation and subtle coercion. The leading man's public image endured untouched, while the lives he disrupted remained invisible. Letterman, reflecting on his own path through comedy, saw a cautionary tale. Charisma alone does not equate to integrity, and admiration can be dangerously deceiving. In later years, Letterman summarized the paradox with striking clarity. He was everyone's hero, but heroes don't destroy people for sport. That smile wasn't kindness, it was camouflage. The man's films endured, adored by millions, while behind the cameras, he built an empire of fear, manipulation, and control. For Letterman, it was a lesson that even the most adored stars could harbor the darkest secrets, and that the ability to charm an audience could mask cruelty that few would ever witness. The leading man was a masterclass in deception, a reminder that the glittering lights of Hollywood often conceal shadows darker than the night itself. In the entertainment business, reputation can be as valuable as talent, and in the golden age, one singer, known for his velvet voice and commanding stage presence, understood that better than anyone. He maintained decades-long stardom, not merely by performing well, but by quietly dismantling anyone who threatened his position. Letterman learned from musicians who had witnessed it firsthand. This singer wielded lies as weapons and rumor as a form of social control. Whispers circulated quickly. If a younger crooner began drawing larger crowds, stories would appear about wild behavior, unprofessionalism, or substance abuse. The rumors, often baseless, followed patterns that insiders recognized immediately. He had friends in every newsroom, one musician explained. He knew how to whisper something just loud enough to ruin you. Those who tried to challenge him, even subtly, often found doors slammed shut, record labels uninterested, bookings canceled, contracts mysteriously voided. Letterman recognized a chilling pattern. Talent alone was insufficient to survive. Success depended on navigating a minefield of power, influence, and manipulation. One young rival learned this the hard way. During a high-profile performance, he drew louder applause than the singer himself. Within weeks, his career faltered. Opportunities vanished, contracts evaporated, and the whispers became a self-fulfilling prophecy. The singer's influence had reminded everyone who controlled the stage, the studios, and the audience. Yet, to the public, he remained untouchable.
As you go through life in show business, are sometimes more than people can stand. You have to have an extremely strong.
His voice soundtracked romance and heartbreak, his albums filled homes, and his presence graced magazine covers. Few dared to speak against him openly. Fewer survived professionally if they tried. Letterman, observing from the sidelines and later navigating his own battles in television, saw how fear and manipulation could masquerade as genius and popularity. The singer's tactics were not merely protective, they were offensive. He built his throne by systematically removing anyone who might overshadow him, ensuring that admiration was directed solely toward him. Talent was secondary to strategy. Influence mattered more than integrity. Letterman came to view him as a prime example of how success in entertainment could be inseparable from cruelty. A figure whose power was derived as much from intimidation as from skill. To the audience, he remained beloved. But to those in the industry, Letterman noted, he was toxic, a master of lies, manipulation, and quiet domination. He didn't climb to the top, Letterman reflected. He cut down every branch above him until there was no one left. It was a lesson in both ambition and corruption. A reminder that behind the applause, there could always lurk something far more dangerous than the public ever suspected. Film is often called a director's medium, and in Hollywood's golden age, one man stood as a towering figure. Critics lauded his genius, studios gave him near-total creative freedom, and audiences revered his artistry. But David Letterman, through conversations with those who worked under him, discovered that the director's brilliance often came hand in hand with psychological cruelty, a manipulation so deep it could leave permanent scars. Actors were the first to feel his control. He deliberately pitted co-stars against one another, fostering jealousy, resentment, and insecurity. If an actress needed to cry for a scene, he didn't offer comfort or guidance. He humiliated her in front of the crew until the tears were real. He believed suffering produced authentic performances, but to Letterman, the line between art and abuse was painfully clear. One actress recalled being publicly shamed over minor errors, while another left the business entirely after being pressured into a dangerous stunt without proper safeguards. Crew members experienced a different kind of torment. The director imposed grueling schedules, then would scrap entire days of work on a whim. Decisions were made arbitrarily, often contradicting previous instructions, leaving set designers, camera operators, and assistants frustrated and exhausted. Letterman recognized the pattern. The director didn't merely want control. He wanted to remind everyone that their fates depended entirely on him. His power was absolute, enforced through unpredictability and fear.
This is not about going, into the night quietly. This is when outrage. This is the birth of the modern Israelis.
Stories of manipulation weren't limited to intimidation. They also included subtle psychological games. Actors described being praised one day and humiliated the next, unsure whether the same person would support or sabotage them. Letterman heard of performers who sought therapy for years to undo the emotional damage inflicted during production. victims of tactics that masqueraded as creative vision. The industry, however, protected him. His films were masterpieces, acclaimed for their artistry, and so no one dared challenge him publicly. The studios valued profit over safety, artistry over empathy. Letterman saw the cruelty not as genius, but as exploitation. The director used trust, vulnerability, and ambition as tools, breaking down those around him for personal gratification. Talent was a resource to manipulate, emotions a currency to extract, and yet his influence remained untouchable. No amount of whispers or complaints could diminish his standing. To Letterman, it was a horrifying illustration of power without accountability, of a system that rewarded brilliance while overlooking the human cost. Reflecting on the director years later, Letterman remarked, "He broke people, and he called it art." That distinction mattered. Genius doesn't excuse cruelty. Talent doesn't grant license to harm. The director's methods, while producing cinematic milestones, left behind a trail of damaged careers, shattered confidence, and trauma. In Hollywood, Letterman realized, the brightest lights often cast the longest shadows, and this director embodied that darkness perfectly. A man whose artistry was celebrated, whose humanity was disregarded, and whose ego controlled everything in its orbit. When most people picture the golden age of Hollywood, they imagine glamour, laughter, and timeless performances. But David Letterman learned that one of its brightest stars, an icon whose name is still spoken with reverence, constructed his legacy not on talent or kindness, but on fear. To the public, he was everywhere. Films, radio, television, and magazine covers. Charismatic, magnetic, seemingly perfect. But behind closed doors, insiders described a very different man. Assistants and crew members recounted a tyrant who demanded absolute loyalty. Mistakes, no matter how minor, were met with screaming fits, belittlement, and humiliation. Co-stars recalled being compelled to rehearse, perform, and even live according to his standards. Any deviation, even unintentional, could threaten a career. Letterman was struck by the stories of young actresses who thought they had been given their big break, only to see it destroyed by advances they could not refuse, followed by whispers of unprofessional behavior that dried up opportunities. He didn't merely assert power on set, he extended it across the industry. Writers who failed to flatter him found themselves blacklisted. Directors who questioned his vision never worked with him again. Competitors discovered that contracts mysteriously dissolved or jobs vanished overnight. The star's influence wasn't limited to charm or talent. It was a quiet, insidious control over the machinery of Hollywood itself. Letterman observed that the public perception of the star made this possible. Fans adored him. Studios valued his box office draw. Journalists hesitated to report whispers that could endanger their access. Even when accounts surfaced, the system protected him. Fear became the currency of the industry, and respect was a distant second. He ruled not through collaboration or inspiration, but by intimidation and strategic elimination.
I was in here a long time ago. Couldn't pay for a couple of drinks. Wouldn't cash my check. They called me a two-bit chiseler.
One young actress's story haunted Letterman. Eager to launch her career, she accepted a role under the star, hoping to shine. Instead, he tested her boundaries, pushed her into uncomfortable situations, and discarded her when she resisted. Within weeks, her reputation was tarnished, and opportunities vanished. It was a stark example of how fear could masquerade as mentorship and cruelty as professionalism. Letterman later reflected on the star's public persona versus his private conduct. Fear is not respect, fear is poison, and he poisoned everyone around him. Despite this, his films and performances endure. The audience still cheers, the media still celebrates, and history remembers him as a legend. But Letterman knew the truth. Behind the glittering facade were careers ruined, ambitions crushed, and people left silenced. To him, the star's legacy was a cautionary tale. Hollywood's brightest lights can conceal darkness, the most adored figures can wield fear as their most powerful tool. The public may only see the glamour, but those who worked in the shadows understand the human cost. For Letterman, the story was clear. Greatness is not measured by fame or fortune. It is measured by how you treat the people who help you get there. And in the case of this star, the lessons were haunting, unforgettable, and painfully instructive. If Hollywood's brightest stars hid their darkest selves, what else lies buried beneath the silver screen? Letterman's revelation forces us to reconsider the legacies we idolize and the shadows they left behind. Maybe the question isn't why he revealed it now, but why it stayed hidden for so long. Tell us your take in the comments below. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.